Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The One Thing That Really Matters. The questions I ask with every episode are, well, what really matters in life? Is it job? Is it family? Is it music? Is it politics? Is it religion or sports? Maybe even current events, particularly nowadays? Well, these are all good questions, but how we handle them normally, they're everyday experiences, and they could very well determine our quality of life, what kind of life we lead. You see, in our handling of everyday situations, I believe there's still only one thing that really matters, which leads us to today's topic. This world is a mess and getting worse. Why? Well, how does what is going on around us fit within the one thing that really matters? Or as I always say, or does it? Seems like everywhere I look nowadays, our country is being overrun by people that are out of control. Many of these people seem to have a blatant disregard for almost everything. There seems to be a disregard for basic human rights, a disregard for private property, a disregard for personal space, personal beliefs, family situations, and so on. In fact, a general disregard for right and wrong. Some people simply break the law. They destroy property, they injure, or sometimes even kill people. Why? Well, I think it's in order to get their point across, or maybe to force their beliefs on everyone else. Frustratingly, at least for me, I don't often see any consequences for their actions, and that becomes demoralizing, not just for me, but for society as a whole, particularly those who are law-abiding. Anyway, their actions become a demoralizing factor. So folks who are determined to defy authority and openly riot and destroy in the name of civil unrest or social justice seem to always demand that everyone else tolerate their actions because, in their mind, those actions are justified. And of course, if you don't tolerate their lawlessness, their lack of tolerance, your lack of tolerance will not be tolerated. It seems like a tongue twister, doesn't it? But it's true, it seems. So why do some people act this way? Well, I'm sure they could cite multiple reasons, and I'm equally sure that given my life experience, I wouldn't always fully understand or accept some of the reasons cited. Seems to me, though, that, to put it simply, some people just want to be. To be what? Someone will most likely say, well, it's complicated, you couldn't possibly understand. Okay, I'll give you that, but let's give it a try. I'll go first, and I'll give you some of my thoughts. Could it be as simple as to be able to make a point? In the noise of society today, making a point isn't easy. In fact, it seems like you have to shout just to be heard because no one's listening. Everyone is so busy making their point that they can't hear you. Or how about this? To be someone who just wants to do things their own way. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Unless, of course, their way becomes the only way, and because they know their way is the right way, they demand that you do things their way as well. Or maybe they just want to be the boss, to be in power, maybe just to be in charge, to be the one who decides what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's acceptable and what's not. In some cases, maybe they just want to be the one who finally pays society back for the evils of the past. Retribution, they say, is right and necessary, and besides, you deserve it. But you can buy back their good graces, here's a key, with a fair amount of reparation dollars and the right kind of apology. Okay, some of this stuff may sound familiar. You know, like we've seen it on TV or heard about it on the news, Maybe we've even been involved or impacted by some, quote, we'll say, mostly peaceful demonstrators who say their behavior and ideals are justified. It's interesting, though, that if you listen between the lines, to me, these actions and attitudes are often seen as new. It's like it's never been done before. Truth is, though, they're actually not new at all. Behaviors and attitudes such as these, it seems to me, have been around for as long as time itself, I think. They've been practiced for centuries all over the world in virtually every country, every county, every town, every hamlet, even every family to some degree. I believe it's a time-honored human struggle for dominance, power, and control. And I believe it started way back with Cain and Abel in the Bible. It's over in Genesis if you want to look it up. Believe it or not, I think Shakespeare may have understood the truth of this human struggle for dominance, power, and control when in Hamlet he wrote the phrase, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them." Okay, I apologize for that. I never did take those acting lessons. Point is, even back in Shakespeare's day, apparently the same kinds of things were going on. Anyway, history, if you can find it, and that's a big if nowadays, history shows that the struggle for dominance, power, and control is a centuries-old struggle that is won and lost generation to generation. Someone once said, in every generation, every society, every nation, and every tongue, there will be someone who believes they are smarter, they have better ideas, they have a better plan, a better way, a better know-how of how to do things, or a better understanding of why other people failed when they try to do the same things in the past. And of course, they believe that they are the ones with that better way. Historically speaking, though, again, if you can find it, history, no matter how sophisticated, enlightened, or woke society becomes, and no matter how you may get participation medals and ribbons, you give them out and we get them, there's always going to be winners and losers. This is something that it seems that some folks don't understand. There's always going to be winners and losers. Times and approaches change, but to be the winners in our society today appears to depend on a strength, but not strength alone, but on who has the best and the most. The best orator, the best media presence, the best algorithms for inflicting the most social media pain, the most determination, maybe even the most willing to experience temporary loss and keep going, or the strongest belief coupled with the willingness to not give up through disappointments, disagreements, and setbacks. Winners today appear to be those most willing to openly shame and intimidate those who disagree. We've probably all been told at some point in our life that there's nothing too hard if you just keep on going. You get hurt, you can walk it off. If at first you don't succeed, try harder, stuff like that. Well, winners in my generation were no different. We believed, acted, and performed in the same way, but alas, they were changing. It's time for fresh ideas, new ways of doing things. Out with the old and in with the new. Well, newsflash, it's always been this way. My parents thought Elvis Presley and the Beatles were the beginning of the end of the world. I'm telling you, kids would never amount to anything back then. Everything was going to hell in a handbasket. You know, the same things my generation thinks today, it seems like. So, here's what I think. In every generation, there are winners and losers. Doesn't matter whether it was the so-called greatest generation who went through the Great Depression and 2 world wars, that's my parents, or the baby boomers, that's me, or Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, XYZ, or the next generation after that. Invariably, and this is important, I think, the winners set about to remake society in their own image. We come up with cute little things to say like, make America great again, or let's rebuild better, or whatever today's soundbite slogan is. Inevitably, though, however, the winners in the dominance, power, and control struggle will set about to force the losers to accept their authority and their way of thinking. For that generation, almost as inevitable, winners will attempt to determine how and where people live, or even if they do live, what language is approved to use, or what words are allowable, what thoughts and attitudes are acceptable. Sound familiar? Which laws are enforced, which are disregarded, whether the masses are free to speak their mind, worship as they see fit, or be ruled by the tyranny of the moment. If you can look around today, and I don't think it matters when today is. It could be 100 years ago. It could be today. It could be 100 years in the future. You'll see the same attitudes, actions, and behaviors happening all over the world. As I mentioned before, winners of every generational dominance for power and control, that struggle, more often than not, seeks to determine whether a person, community, or a nation stays the same or is remade in their image. Those who agree with the acceptable norms of the day are considered okay, while those who don't either give in, give up, find a new place to live, or cancel altogether by other means. We've all probably heard it said that we can and should learn from history. And if you find it, maybe you could. We don't seem to be able to learn from history, though. Why is that, do you think? Could it be because history is often destroyed, rewritten, or revised before we get it on our devices or before we get it in our textbooks? Well, it depends on who you ask, I'm sure, but to me, and I'm an average person, I think, we're busy working day to day trying to eke out a living, and history may seem irrelevant for what we have to do today. It may even get in the way, so we don't really pay any attention or give it any mind. History doesn't really seem worth knowing since there's no perceived immediate benefit, and we do love our instant gratification. Hey, I'm part of that. However, to those in search of dominance, power, and control, history may be seen as a threat to their control. Now, pay attention to this. History just could be a way for the average person to reasonably conclude that the results of actions and laws enacted by those in power very often don't work and even lead to hardships for you and me. You know, like the inflated costs of gasoline, groceries, and new cars, or anything else you might want to add to that. So many times, equal winds up being unequal. Equitable winds up being unequitable, and fair winds up being unfair. That's happened over and over in my lifetime. So it's reasonable to me to assume that if history is left intact, as it actually happened, our generation and the next, and the one after that, might be able to take a historical look at what actually happened to the last generation when those same things were tried and done and say, no, thank you, that didn't work. Let's try something different. Maybe let someone else be in charge. There's the rub. Again, historically speaking, generational dominance and power and control winners find ways to facilitate the destruction of history. This might sound familiar to you as well. Sometimes it's through the arts, sometimes through emotional appeals, sometimes through history revision, sometimes by removing historical artifacts or printed materials or statues and stuff like that from the public square. Sometimes it's all of the above. Sometimes it may be through peaceful actions, but then sometimes not so peaceful. No matter how history is erased, the proven result is to tear down the status quo and rebuild society in the image of the winner. In today's vernacular, we hear mantras such as to fundamentally change, or to make America great again, or to build back better. It really doesn't matter what the catchphrase slogan of the day is. They all mean the same thing, to remake society in the image of the winner. Over the course of history, I keep repeating it, but again, if you can find it, we can trace the struggle for dominance and power and control in country after country, empire after empire, superpower after superpower throughout the ages. The United States is not the exception, merely the next generation. My questions are these. Is a generational struggle for dominance, power, and control inevitable? And does it come from the one thing that really matters? By now you know that, I believe, is love. It's been said that generational conflicts and struggles arise when the interests or ideals of one generation collide openly with those of another. While I believe the so-called generation gap can impact relationships, I think the mobile, fast-changing world we live in today has resulted in value and attitude changes that are different from the values and attitudes I grew up with. But then the values and attitudes I grew up with were different from the ones my parents held dear. And if it wasn't the mobile, fast-changing world of today, I'm sure it would be something else. I personally can't say definitely that generational struggles are inevitable, but I can look back on history and say that they always happen. Can they be stopped? Probably, but only if we as a people decide to do so, and then only for that generation. Will they be stopped? Probably not. Unless, of course, another generation decides to stop their struggle and give up their opportunity to remake society in their own image. Still probably not. Well, does all this really matter, though? Well, certainly. Certainly it matters for parents concerned with what their children are being taught. Definitely for those who are trying to make a living, raise a family, keep a home, maybe take a vacation if they can afford it, or retire someday. But unless we keep it in the right perspective, all of this can also be a distraction. It keeps us from experiencing the freedom that comes with the one thing that really matters, real love. Love for life, love for one another, love for God, true love. You see, everything we've talked about today involves things that are constantly changing. The one thing that really matters is real love, and it never changes. Our understanding of things changes, but that doesn't change love. What is love today, what was love yesterday, and what will be love tomorrow will stay the same forever. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the one thing that really matters. Make no mistake, the struggle is real, but the results of the struggle are not final. Another generation is just around the corner, or across the water, or about to be born. Some people may transcend generations, and some may resist the change. However, generations will continue to come, and generations will continue to pass, at least until Jesus returns. Each generation will seek to do things their own way, with the tools in their toolkit. Many, however, will sadly probably never discover the really thing, or the one thing that really matters. Let me encourage you to not be one of those people. Experience love, the kind of love that makes you willing to give your heart, to give your soul, to give your life if necessary for another. You can still use all the fancy doodads and the gadgets and the technology available today. Just use them with love. And speaking of tools and technology, in the next episode, I plan to discuss the topic social media, good or bad. I hope you'll join me for that and join me for the one thing that really matters. And as always, I will say, you can either disagree or agree. Either way, I hope to generate the opportunity for critical thinking and personal awareness. I'll see you next time, but let's do it with love, okay? Bye-bye.